Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have a very interesting news story for the 2026 US Senate elections where Democratic Representative Seth Moulton in the state of Massachusetts has launched a Democratic primary run for Senate against the Democratic incumbent Ed Markey. Now Seth Moulton, the big argument that he made in his announcement video, there was the age difference between himself and Markey, who is currently 79 years old, making a generational argument and saying that he should make way for a younger Democrat to take the seat and essentially carry on the Democratic race with a younger face for the race. Now, there's a few things going on in this. There's the Senate aspect, there's the House aspect. There's a lot of different points here, but I just want to talk about this race. I thought it was very interesting and something that we actually saw a little bit back in 2020. Now, Seth Moulton and Ed Markey both are Democrats, but in a lot of ways are very different. Seth Moulton, after the 2024 election, as many Democrats were sort of wondering what happened, what went wrong, why did Donald Trump win, why did Kamala Harris lose, a lot of Democrats had different answers. Some of which were some Democrats saying that Democrats were running too far to the left and didn't go to the middle enough. And I think Seth Moulton would be someone that's more in line with that lane. He made remarks about transgender people and such that broke with a lot of other Democrats in his party that would usually not make, and that would go the opposite direction of where Seth Moulton did, whereas Ed Markey is someone who is much more about as far on the political left as you can really get, and he would argue that the Democratic Party to win presidential elections and stuff going forward need to go further to the left. So from a Democratic side here, you really have both ends of the Democratic Party, and Seth Moulton and Ed Markey now facing off for this race. Some would call Seth Moulton a centrist, some would call Markey a very strong progressive. So from that standpoint alone, it's going to be a very interesting matchup. Also very interesting as well as the age issue, with Moulton being 46 years old, Markey being 79, and there being some legitimate concerns about Ed Markey being 79 years old, being one of the longest elected members of Congress because he served in Congress and the House before getting elected senator back in the special election, I believe in 2013 or in 2014. So Markey's been around a very long time, and that's the argument Moulton is going to make in this race. Now, for the Senate side of things, what's interesting about this is Markey won a primary in 2020 against the Democratic candidate who was trying to run against him for a very similar reason, which was Markey has been a long time in office and believed it was time to turn over for a new leadership. And Ed Markey was able to win that. I'll get more into that in just one second. Markey will be 80 years old at the time of the 2026 election and has faced some calls to retire due to his age being a legitimate concern. Now, Ed Markey has already announced he is running for re-election, and the most notable challenger to him is now Seth Moulton, the U.S. Representative of Massachusetts' 6th Congressional District. And just to give you an idea here, the 6th District right here, Massachusetts 6, was a safe Democratic win for Seth Moulton in 2024. No Republicans even ran against Moulton in this race. So why would Moulton do this? He's giving up a safe Democratic seat. In 2022, it went blue by 27 points. In 2020, Seth Moulton, before it was redrawn, went 30 points for Moulton. 2018, safe blue 33.8. 2016, Moulton won 96.7%. 2014 was the last time it was even remotely competitive between Moulton and Republican Richard Tassay, who ran many, many times going back before this. It was a around 14-point win. Back in 2012, the Democrat Tierney and Tassay had a very close race, 1.2%. 2010, very close as well, Tierney, or closer, 13.9. The Republican Hudak, 42.9. But really, since 2012, this district has not been competitive in Massachusetts, and Seth Moulton's giving up a safe Democratic seat that he would pretty much be guaranteed to win at the general election level. Now, I say that very strongly because there were some concerns and calls among Democrats that Seth Moulton and the comments he made on issues like the transgender issue may not be Democratic enough for the district and for the Democrats in Massachusetts, and would be trying to primary him from the left and try and get him out of office. But instead of that being the possibility now, Seth Moulton is deciding to mount his own primary challenge against Ed Markey. So it's interesting. Is there something going on behind the scenes with Seth Moulton with polling that shows maybe he would lose the Democratic primary against a farther left challenger in his own district, and would he rather take the chance to run for Senate in 2026 against Ed Markey? Because, and I know I saw an opinion article as well, I believe from the Boston Globe, that said these words: this is a very ambitious move by Seth Moulton in his political career to try and challenge a Democratic incumbent U.S. Senator of his own party and win the primary 6 years after another Democrat tried to do the same thing that was also an aspiring Democrat and failed to do so. It's a very bold move by Seth Moulton, and one that the odds would probably tell you Moulton does not have, initially starting out, the strongest chance of doing so. Now, it is possible for Seth Moulton to win, just like last time in 2020 it was possible for Joe Kennedy to win, but I still think Ed Markey starts out as the favorite. Would Seth Moulton have a better chance at staying in his district and winning re-election there? He would have to fend off a tough primary, perhaps, but he would have no chance at losing the general election, just like the Senate race wouldn't either. But it's a very fascinating conversation here. Now, Markey and Moulton, there's not been any primary polling done yet, though both of which are raising pretty substantial money. As of June 30th, Markey had about $2.5 million cash on hand. Seth Moulton had about $2 million, and pretty much all of this is going to go to the general election. As Massachusetts is one of the bluest states in the United States at the general election level, it just voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by about 25.2%, definitely in the safe Democratic category at the presidential level. And at the Senate level, the Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, though she did perform worse than Kamala Harris by a decent amount, John Deaton, the Republican that was running, was also more of a moderate liberal Republican than Donald Trump is, and he got 40% of the vote. Warren got 19.8% margin of victory win here. John Deaton did win 2 counties in Plymouth County and Bristol County in Massachusetts, where Donald Trump, though he did come close in Bristol, did not win any counties. Still a safe Democratic win, even with the Republican John Deaton doing stronger here. As for 2026, Moulton and Markey is going to be the main Markey matchup of this race. John Deaton, their nominee from 2024, has expressed interest in running again, and if he does, it is possible it could be another relatively competitive, by Massachusetts standards, maybe under 20-point matchup between Markey or Moulton versus Deaton if he does decide to run. But still, the Democrats are very, very, very heavily favored to win this race at the general election level. All eyes will be on the primary. The only poll that's been conducted was from Fiscal Alliance between September 23rd and 24th of a very small sample size of only 278 likely voters, and it shows Seth Moulton at 38.1%, basically 30% for Ed Markey, and 32% undecided. So essentially, wide open polling race on this as well, and we'll have to wait and see how that develops. Though again, Ed Markey probably would start out as the favorite, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But again, for the general election, solid, safe Democratic. The only way this gets competitive would be if Charlie Baker decided to run, where 2 polls from 2024 and 2025 showed him in a tough fight against Ed Markey, though a lot of undecided voters left out there. It would be like Larry Hogan running in Maryland. Baker would probably lose by under 15 points, wouldn't have a chance of winning, but it would be a lot more competitive than it usually is. Deaton would be trailing by around 19-20% or so in that regard. So I keep alluding to it. Let me show you the 2020 Democratic primary, where Joseph Kennedy, who yes is a member of the Kennedy family, Joseph Kennedy III to be specific, mounted a primary challenge against Ed Markey, and a lot of the big reasons he mentioned was he was a 39-year-old running against Markey who was 74. And he wanted to run for this race and make the argument that it was time for a younger Democrat to replace Ed Markey. And so much so, let me pull up the Senate race here from 2020, because now I'm curious to see how it ended up going in the primary in terms of polling here. Kennedy had his fair share of endorsements throughout both the executive branch, but also a lot of U.S. representatives as well against Ed Markey, and it became a very interesting proxy battle between the establishment Democrats and between the progressive Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. Now, for the overall polling averages, though, it showed Ed Markey with a pretty clear lead in this race, leading by about 12 points in the final Emerson College poll. Emerson, honestly, one of the very spot-on pollsters in the last few elections that have taken place in 2025 so far. Back in 2020, they showed to be very correct as well here with that 12-point margin. Data for Progress, Democratic pollster, showed it a 7-point race, but Emerson back in May showed there was a possibility Kennedy could win. Kennedy was leading 58-42. UMass Lowell had Kennedy up 44-42, and Suffolk Boston had 42-36. So there was a real potential for Kennedy to win here with a lot of these undecided voters still left out there. Ultimately, though, as the election got close, Ed Markey consolidated a lot of Democratic support, especially from farther left progressive voters and younger voters, gathering up their support and making so that Kennedy could not really get any more than that 44% or so in that regard. And what ultimately ended up happening, as I showed you, was the map where Markey got 55.4%, Kennedy got 44.6%, right around an 11-point win, where the polling had it pretty much going. And you look at it, it's a very interesting map, because you see Ed Markey doing well in the big area of Boston, obviously capital of Massachusetts, biggest city in the state, voted for Markey by about 60-40 margin. The city of Worcester voted very narrowly for Kennedy over Markey. Springfield, another large city in the state, voted for Kennedy over Markey. Then you go through the state, you go through the surrounding towns, and obviously much smaller by population, but these areas voted for Markey over Kennedy, including a very significant bunch of what is now Seth Moulton's district voted for Markey over Kennedy. For instance, big cities, you can look up here as well. You can look into Salem, which voted for Markey over Kennedy. Lynn and Peabody were very close as well. And these are important areas to keep note of, because in this primary election of Moulton versus Markey, there's going to be some key areas that are going to be watched a lot in this election. And again, as I mentioned, that House district that Moulton represents in Massachusetts encompasses a lot of these key areas in this district. So it's very interesting. We're going to have to wait and see how it plays out. The initial kind of hunch that I have for this race is, again, without any polling data, I think more likely than not, we saw Ed Markey defeat a Kennedy in Massachusetts back in 2020. I thought that would make a lot of Democrats think twice about trying to primary challenge him, though still pretty competitive. An 11-point win against an incumbent U.S. senator still leaves Ed Markey at least semi-decently vulnerable to a primary challenge in 2026. But if a Kennedy couldn't beat him, I'm not sure if Seth Moulton's going to be able to beat him, but we'll have to wait and see how it ultimately all goes in the primary day. But I think Ed Markey starts out as the favorite to win this primary race. Just lastly, for the House race, on the 6th district, which is now going to be vacant, 3 Democrats have already jumped in. Beth Andres Beck from Middleton, Massachusetts, Jamie Balcedo, Topsfield Town Moderators jumped in, and Daniel Coe, the former Deputy Director of the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, and from the town of Andover, have all entered the race, with 2 other Democrats, Jared Nicholson and Tram Gwen, expressing interest, and 1 Democrat, Kevin Larrivee, filing paperwork to run in this race. So on the Democratic side, for this race, there's going to be a competitive Democratic primary with Moulton not running. And on the general election side of things, going to be a safe Democratic win like it was in 2024. Democrats aren't in any danger of losing this race at the general election level. Like with the Senate race, it's just going to be who ends up winning the Democratic primary. So that's what I have for you in today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe as I post more videos in the future. I have some very important 2025 election videos coming out in the next week or so that you're not going to want to miss out on. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.